or smart speaker and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan, and in for Amy J this morning, former ABC 7 political reporter Charles Thomas. Yesterday, tried to get an update on the situation with these flying objects in American airspace that we continue to apparently need to shoot down. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was asked about his understanding of what the objects were and if any debris has been recovered, since we know where they were shot down and ostensibly we have a beat on where some of the pieces landed.
Mr. Secretary, have you been able to recover any part of the most recent 3 objects? And why continue to call them objects? Are these not balloons?
Well, we're going to confirm what they are once we have collected the debris. But to answer your question, we've not recovered any debris from the 3 most recent shootdowns.
It's inspiring a lot of confidence. National Security Council spokes being John Kirby, if that's actual John Kirby and not a reptilian humanoid who's assumed John Kirby's body. We don't know. We don't know at this point. He was asked about aliens. Of course he was, because that's the country we live in today.
My understanding is that the top officials at the Pentagon, when asked explicitly if they were ruling out any kind of extraterrestrial presence, said they weren't ruling anything out. And yet at the beginning of today's briefing, albeit with her usual winning smile, Ms. Jean-Pierre seemed to rule out any extraterrestrial activity.
I don't think the American people need to worry about aliens with respect to these craft, period. I don't think there's any more that needs to be said there.
Well, how do you know? We don't know anything. You're telling us you don't know anything, but you're telling us not to worry about aliens. And now we have all these, for the last year, all these like Pentagon files that seem to implicate the possibility of UFOs, and which breeds these unbelievable conversations about, alien contacts. Who in the government has been anal probed by an extraterrestrial? We need to know, Charles. It's only our national security. It's not a big deal because the real scuttlebutt, of course, is that all of the objects that were shot down are part of a Chinese communist intel operation. And the real concern is not aliens, maybe outside of the D.C. press corps. The real concern is not aliens, but very real Chinese communists. And Gordon Chang was on Tucker Carlson offering this conclusion.
Yes, they do, because it shows, certainly the Chinese balloon intrusion shows an utter disregard and disrespect for the United States by floating that over our most sensitive facilities. And that really means that deterrence is now lost, which means the Chinese are probably going to do whatever they want, which means we're going to be in a very difficult situation, perhaps over the United States, but certainly in Asia as well.
Yeah, there's nothing funny about that. For more on this as it impacts markets, pleased to be joined by our friend Jim Iuorio, Fox business analyst and proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So, alien invasion, buy into or sell into?
I don't know that there's any, like in the old days, you have these little sayings for every sort of thing, like buy Maine, go away, and buy at the sound of trumpets, sell at the sound of horns, or get cannons, whatever. There's nothing for alien invasions, so I'm going to decide to not worry about alien invasions. By the way, when I add something to this too, is that with the percentage of people who actually trust media right now being at 26%, which I believe is an all-time low, my get when I see a story that's unbelievably big and is designed to capture the hearts and minds of the American people, I put my head in a swivel and think, what story are they trying to not get me to look at? So I think the notion that these things either, I'm going to say they're Chinese surveillance vehicles, which fine, that seems to make a lot more sense to me. The second on the list would be that there's nothing even really happening at all, and we're just being, look at this hand while the other hand is in your pocket, sort of thing. But again, the alien invasion, we don't have a blueprint for trading alien invasion.
Look, you're a Fox business analyst. Put your tinfoil hat on and tune into their channels. You know,
I don't know. I get so confused about all of it. But I will say this for sure: alien invasion has got to be bullish because, okay, let's say we're really shooting down aliens and have access to new technologies, or they destroy us. In which case, who cares if you're along the stock market anyway? So I say it's like it's a buy, in my opinion. How about that?
All right. I mean, I essentially, John Kirby, we don't need to worry about him. He didn't say they didn't exist, so maybe he's saying they come in peace. And you're right, we could open up new markets and new galaxies for our products.
Or we're all doomed, and in which case,
one of the two
is richer than who? Yeah,
one of the two. But the point that Gordon Chang makes about China and has been made by serious people, Mike McCall, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Air Force General, that we could be in a precarious position with respect to China and their designs on Taiwan, and this is an intel and a testing operation, and that's destabilizing, and that's not good for markets, particularly when you see stories about Fortune 500 CEOs are returning to mainland China.
Yeah, so this is actually a big market story because remember, just flash back to 1980 when we had the same situation as now, this cost push inflation where, input costs were high, i.e. oil, is what was keeping inflation nasty and persistent. And part of the thing that happened over the next 20 years is we kicked open the door to global trade and we could access less expensive labor in the developing market. Now, we are moving absolutely in the opposite direction of that now. So every news story that comes out that's pointing a finger at China or China pointing a finger at us is making it less conducive to have this sort of global economy where every country takes advantage of the inexpensive advantages that other countries have. Now, this is a big deal, and this plays into the inflation story in a big way. So that when I read that, anything I read that accelerates the notion that China is less of our friend and more of our enemy, and I'm not saying the absolutist friend or enemy, just along that scale, to me is inflationary because it limits our ability to take advantage of what they can provide in the global marketplace. So I think this is an enormous deal.
Talking about inflationary, so report coming today, and some of the early indications are it's not going to be great news on the inflation front and the price front. Warehouses and distribution centers pushing rates higher with U.S. storage prices up 1.4% month over month and nearly 11% a year over year. And suggestions from market analysts that inflation is stickier than was believed in some corners a month ago, and so on. So this inflation report, the implications for today, the implications for Fed policy, how important that is, what Jay Powell decides to do in March and beyond.
It's a huge deal. We're at an inflection point. Like, I've been in this business for 35 years, and we always, every month, we just keyed on the unemployment report on the first Friday of every month. That's completely changed. The CPI number is by far the biggest, what comes out today. And not just, and people who know, deep down, dig into the nuance of macroeconomics know that the CPI number is not a very good number. It has a lot of flaws in its calculation, but it doesn't matter because that's what the Fed looks at. So this CPI number is particularly important because it comes in the shadow of that unemployment number from 2 weeks ago that was way higher than people thought. The labor market giving signs that it was stronger. I personally think that number was an illusion if you wanted to dig into that, but that's about an hour show. But we have to see now if the labor market really is strong and then inflation is starting to pick back up again, well, that's a recipe for higher Fed aggressiveness in raising rates, and that should equal lower asset prices. I'm not of that camp. I think base case is because I think the inflation that happened over the last couple of years was partly monetary and partly supply chain, and some of those things are beginning to work themselves out as well. And I think inflation is coming down, and I think we are going into some sort of recession, but I'm not an end-of-the-world type recession person. But I do think, paradoxically, that stocks could do well because if we believe the Fed is done raising rates, meaning the economy is slowed enough for the Fed to be done raising rates, then the stocks don't have to worry as much about higher rates and people buy back into the stock market. So I mean, buy on bad news is alive and well, and that's what I think my base case is.
So what's your anticipation for the report today? You think, it seems to be the telegraphing that that you're going to see a tick up, and that's going to send people scrambling. But you don't think that is, if that is indeed the case, you don't think that's something that persists or necessarily changes Fed policy beyond March?
That's exactly what I believe. I believe the Fed is going 2 more 25 basis point hikes, and then they'll be done. And I believe what the market's telling me is that by the end of 2023, that the Fed could actually be easing rates, cutting rates. I think this is very interesting. Now, there's a little bit of a wild card of this, and that's the Lyle Brainerd moving from the Fed to getting an important economic position at the federal government. So if you are the Joe Biden administration, and on one day you claim that you care about inflation and fighting inflation, and the next day you appoint Lyle Brainerd to an important economics position within your administration, it means you do not care one bit about inflation. She's always been an uber dove, favoring low interest rates, profligate spending, and with this notion of modern monetary theory, I don't know if you know what it is that if you see inflation, you quickly raise taxes. It's the most asinine theory I've ever heard in my life, and she is a devotee of that. So this is like Beck putting, Bobby Kennedy in charge of, investigating the mob when in fact, the Kennedy family is the mob. Okay. So this is what our government occasionally does, have Kraft fund the Food and Drug Administration, things like that. I love when they put the fox in charge of the hen house and they pretend like they're doing us a favor. Thank you. All
right. So does this even matter? I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday and this was after a conversation we had with John Tammany from Real Clear Markets, who's very persnickety in terms of how you talk about inflation and so on and so forth, and what markets will do and what kind of impact long term the Fed has on markets. And basically, I just come away at this day from these talks about the market these days, basically saying, okay, the whole thing is rigged, and basically I just need to be lucky enough to fall on the right side of Ken Griffin's arbitrages, and I'll do okay.
Okay, I think you get it now. Yes.
Okay, good.
And just to underscore that point too, and I'm not making any allegations, but I'm saying this. I've been in the business for 35 years. The last 2 CPI reports, approximately 2 to 3 minutes before the report came out, several markets moved in big directions that would have been commensurate with the person making those trades knowing what the CPI report would be. So that's just on a micro level to say that there might be leaks. And I'm not saying there's leaks. I'm saying that if you're the SEC or the FBI, call me. I can help you investigate, because it is unusual that someone would try to move a big block of things 2 to 3 minutes before the major report of the month, perhaps the year. And again, now we're talking about inflation too, and food and energy are stripped out of the CPI, the things we buy every day. And also, one of the reasons they're stripped out of the CPI for the core is that they're the things that are least responsive to interest rate hikes, and probably even the least responsive, well, not least responsive to global activity, but the point is that those things are affected more by regulation and taxes and things that the actual government is putting upon these companies to make it more difficult for them to deal. And that inflation is going to stay relatively high. And they sit back and they come on TV and tell us, yeah, we're doing our best to fight inflation. And then they pass a ridiculous bill like the Inflation Reduction Act, which was one of the most inflationary pieces of legislation I've seen in a long time. So the whole thing is absolutely maddening, to your point. And again, sometimes you have to rely on luck or just rely on a healthy dose of cynicism for everything you read and hear.
Yeah, well, don't count on the FBI. They're too busy targeting Catholics who go to the Latin Mass. They don't have time for people manipulating the markets.
Right?
Yeah,
yes, exactly. By the way, I'm not accusing anybody.
No, of course not. No, of course not. You're describing a bank robbery, but it doesn't mean anybody's robbing a bank. I want to be clear about that. It does not mean that. Jim Iuorio, Fox Business Analyst, proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Jim, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. Your business and your money are in good hands with Signature Bank. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
Hi, I'm Jason Zenger, owner of Zenger's Industrial Supply and host of the Making Shifts podcast, and a proud customer of Signature Bank. Through rapid growth, acquisitions of competitors, and taking over from the previous generation, Signature Bank was there with us every step of the way. Recently, the team introduced us to FinRails AP, their proprietary system for accounts payable automation. Not only did FinRails AP help us to reduce costs and create efficiencies, but it also helped minimize fraud risk.